I'm Michael Martinez, and you're about to listen to an AI-generated discussion of my article, What Were the Honeycakes of the Beornings? Most people are unaware that the name is pronounced Bern, not Beorn, as in the movie, and therefore the name of the tribe is the Beornings. So the AI obviously learned how to pronounce these names from people talking about the movies. You're going to hear Beorn and all that throughout the discussion. There's no way that I know of that I can train them to say it correctly.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Get ready, because today we're plunging into a really beloved, maybe slightly mysterious corner of J.R.R. Tolkien's world.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
We're tackling Beorn's famous, or maybe infamous, honeycakes.
Ah, the honeycakes. It's one of those details that sparks so much curiosity, isn't it? You always wonder, what were those cakes really like?
Exactly. And to help us get to the bottom of it, we've been digging into a fantastic article. It's from the Middle-earth Blog by Michael Martinez.
Oh, Michael Martinez. Yeah, he does some great deep dives himself.
He really does. He's known for taking like a magnifying glass to specific points in Tolkien's writing. And he's actually written quite a bit more about Beorn, the Beornings, the Northmen, and how they connect to the Edain and some other pieces too.
Right. His approach often cuts through the common assumptions, the things we think we know about Middle-earth, to see what the text actually says.
Which is pretty much our mission for this deep dive. We want to follow his lead, unpack the source material he uses, and figure out what Tolkien likely had in mind for these cakes. Look for the surprising facts hidden right there in the books.
Okay.
So, come join us as we sift through the details Martinez provides.
Sounds good. Let's start right where most of us first meet these cakes.
Yeah.
The Hobbit. There's this natural tendency, isn't there, to imagine them as these delightful, maybe even medieval pastries.
Totally.
You picture something soft, sweet, maybe a bit crumbly.
Like some kind of fantasy shortbread or maybe a sweet loaf? Yeah. But right away, the article tackles that. It corrects that common misconception. It points out that people often assume Tolkien was thinking of some kind of medieval recipe.
And that's probably not it. The key thing here, Martinez suggests, is understand how the word cake itself has kind of changed meaning over time.
How so?
Well, those light, fluffy dessert cakes we think of today were actually relatively recent, only really popping up in England around the 1600s.
Oh, wow. That late?
Yeah. Older baked goods called cakes were generally much different, more like, sweet breads or really dense bread-like things.
Okay, that's a really critical distinction then. So knowing that immediately changes the picture. It steers us away from imagining like a modern cupcake or even a fruit cake.
Right.
The text then sets the record straight on what Beorn actually gave Thorin and company when they were leaving his place for Mirkwood.
Exactly. The passage in The Hobbit lists the provisions.
Yeah.
Ponies, a horse for Gandalf, nuts, flour, dried fruits in sealed jars, pots of honey.
And then right there, front and center for us, twice-baked cakes that would keep good a long time and on a little of which they could march far.
That one sentence is packed, isn't it?
Yeah.
Incredibly informative. They're explicitly called twice-baked.
Okay, key detail.
They keep good a long time. That tells you something about their texture, their composition. Probably pretty hard.
Right. Durable.
A little of one was highly sustaining, so nutrient-dense, calorie-rich, something like that. Their making was one of Beorn's secrets. Adds a bit of mystique.
Yep.
They contained honey, obviously, fitting with Beorn and his bees and his whole diet. And interestingly, they were good to eat, but they made one thirsty.
Which also maybe suggests they were quite dry.
Could be, yeah. So right there in The Hobbit, we get this picture of a food that's fundamentally different from our modern idea of cake.
Okay.
It's designed for function, right?
Oh.
A durable, high-energy travel ration.
Makes sense.
Exactly. And that description, twice bake, is probably the biggest clue we get about their physical nature. We need to hang on to that one.
Okay, got it. And that whole idea of a long-lasting food, that really comes into focus again later in Middle-earth's history, doesn't it? If you think about the Lord of the Rings.
Ah, yes.
Specifically the Fellowship of the Ring, when the Fellowship gets the gift of Lembas from the elves of Lothlorien.
Right. This is where Beorn's cakes get their most famous shout-out. Remember Gimli, the dwarf? He's initially pretty skeptical of the Lembas. What does he first think it is?
He thinks it's cram, which, as the article notes later, is maybe not the most appealing thing, described in the etymologies as potentially a press cake, maybe not very tasty.
Not exactly a compliment, no. But the lembas itself, it's described as a very thin cake, light brown outside, cream-colored inside, and importantly, crisp.
Crisp, okay. But then Gimli tries it, and his reaction just flips.
Completely. He eats the rest right up. And that leads to his now famous line.
The one everyone remembers. Why it is better than the honeycakes of the Beornings.
And that is great praise, for the Beornings are the best bakers that I know of.
Boom. So that single comparison, it tells us so much, even though Lembas is, supposedly better. It positions Beorn cakes as a really high standard.
Definitely. For Gimli, the Beornings were the absolute best bakers, which means their cakes, including these honey cakes, were highly regarded. Taste, quality, the whole package.
Okay, so let's connect these dots then. We've got Beorn's twice-baked cakes from The Hobbit. They keep a long time, sustain travelers. And we have Lembas from Lord of the Rings, described as crisp, also highly sustaining. And Gimli explicitly compares it favorably to the Beorning cakes, calling them the best bakers.
Right. And the article really highlights how these descriptions line up. Lembas, being crisp, strongly implies a hard-baked bread or biscuit.
Right. Seems like it.
And it's most likely twice-baked, just like Beorn's cakes were described way back in The Hobbit.
And the reason for that second baking, it hardens the whole thing.
Exactly. It dries out moisture, makes it hard. That's fundamental to getting that long-lasting quality you need for travel food.
Okay.
And this whole idea of something being twice-baked actually has deep historical roots. Martinez points out Tolkien likely had something like Italian biscotti or other hard biscuits in mind.
Biscotti, right. They're hard.
Very. And think about the word biscuit itself. It comes from the Latin pedis cactus.
Biscoctus, meaning?
Literally bread, twice baked.
Wow, okay. So the word itself tells the story. It's directly linked to that process.
Exactly. And historically, various forms of hard, twice-baked breads like ancient hardtack, they were essential. For sailors, soldiers, travelers. They just wouldn't spoil for ages.
Right, survival food. So we're definitely moving away from the image of a soft, fluffy cake and much closer to something like a hard biscuit, maybe. Or a dense energy bar designed purely for keeping you going on a journey.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But that raises an interesting question, one the article brings up. If Tolkien meant something like a hard, twice-baked bread, historically related to what we might call a biscuit or hardtack, why didn't he just use the word biscuit?
Good question. Why didn't he?
Well, this is probably where his famous precision with language comes in, his philological background.
The word nerdery.
Exactly. The article suggests the modern English word biscuit, especially in the UK where Tolkien lived, it had evolved. It meant something quite different by his time.
Like what?
More like the American cookie. A fun, sometimes sweet snack, eaten pretty quickly. Not the sturdy, long-lasting travel food he was describing.
Okay, so the word biscuit would give the wrong impression.
Probably. Using biscuit might have made readers picture something totally different from what he intended. So by calling them twice-baked cakes, he emphasizes the process and the resulting quality, that durability, without the baggage of the modern word biscuit.
That makes a lot of sense. Clever. Okay, so beyond the twice-baked biscuit-like nature, are there any other, real-world parallels or related concepts the article explores?
Well, we touched on cram briefly, Gimli's first guess for Lembas. The article notes it might be a less appealing press cake based on details in the etymologies. Not something you'd look forward to eating, probably.
Right. Any other historical comparisons?
Yeah, it brings in some interesting ones, like Viking flatbreads found in Scandinavia. These were often hard, like biscuits, potentially twice baked, sometimes made with barley.
Okay. Viking travel food?
And there's also a reference within Middle-earth's own lore. The legend of Isildur mentions Númenorian wafers of waybread.
Ah, like Lembas.
Similar to Lembas, yeah. Also long-lasting and sustaining. And the article adds this cool little detail. The word wafer apparently comes from an old Frankish word for honeycomb.
Honeycomb. Suggesting, what, texture?
Possibly, yeah. Maybe a textured surface. So you see this recurring theme, right? Across history, both real and fictional, the need for a durable, long-lasting travel food.
From Númenorian wafers and Elvish Lembas to Beornin cakes and maybe even that Daleman's cram.
And echoed in real-world historical hardbreads. Exactly.
Now, one thing we haven't really dug into yet is the honey part. Beorn's honey cakes.
Right. The article confirms honey was definitely in there. Makes sense given Beorn, the bees, the honey everywhere around his house.
And it thinks about other possible additions, like fruits or nuts.
It does. And while some historical honey cake recipes, even from way back in the 1200s, did sometimes include stuff like that, the article leans against it for Beorn's specific cakes. precisely because their purpose was to be a hard, durable travel food, like hardtack. Fruits or nuts might add moisture, maybe cause spoilage faster.
Ah, okay. Keep it simple, keep it dry.
Seems likely.
Mm-hmm.
Though Martinez includes a really fascinating addendum here. He talks about his research into old German honey nut cakes. And he thinks Tolkien was probably familiar with these.
Oh, this part was so cool. He found details on a specific recipe.
Yeah, for honey nut cakes. Published in a 1904 bulletin, apparently by a Mrs. E. Smith. And the key characteristic, the thing that makes it so relevant to Beorn's cakes.
What?
When made properly, it will keep for a year.
A whole year? Seriously?
Seriously. It's described as German in origin, and the ingredients list gives you a sense of it. Sugar, honey, milk or water, almonds, walnuts, candied peel, spices, soda, flour. It sounds incredibly dense and tough.
Built to last.
Absolutely.
Fits
Designed
that.
for storage and longevity. Way more than a light modern cake.
Okay, that fits that keep good a long time description perfectly then. Wow.
It really does. The article also briefly mentions Scottish oatcakes, saying they have that sort of wafer-style appearance. But notes there isn't necessarily the same evidence they had. Those super long-lasting properties like the German honey nut cake or historical hardtack.
Gotcha. So, okay, wrapping that bit up. We don't have a direct, canonical recipe from Tolkien himself.
No, sadly, none.
But Martinez's research, especially finding that specific German honey nut cake recipe that could keep for a year, that offers a really strong candidate for the type of food Tolkien might have pictured, emphasizing the durability, the core ingredients like honey, maybe nuts.
Exactly. It paints a much clearer picture.
Okay, let's pause here and just think about what this deep dive, guided by Michael Martinez's analysis, really tells us. What does digging into these details reveal about Tolkien's world?
Well, first off, I think it demonstrates the incredible depth, the meticulousness of his world building, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even something that seems like a minor detail, a food item, it's often grounded in linguistic history, real-world food traditions, and it has a clear, functional purpose within the story.
Right. It wasn't just set dressing. It served a purpose for the characters, for their journeys. It gives you a much richer, more specific picture of the challenges, the realities of travel in Middle-earth. They weren't packing, fluffy pastries.
Yeah.
They were relying on practical, high-energy rations designed to last.
And it shows how elements introduced relatively early, like Beorn's cakes way back in The Hobbit, they aren't just throwaways. They become part of the larger tapestry. They serve as a benchmark, right, against which later, maybe even more significant items like the Elvish waybread, Lembas, get measured.
That's a great point. It connects the worlds of the two books really beautifully.
It really does. It makes you appreciate the layers in his writing on a whole new level.
It absolutely does. Okay, so here's a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over after this deep dive, pulling together everything we've explored from Michael Martinez's article. Does knowing the potential real-world inspirations from ancient Roman biscottis and Viking flatbread to Italian biscotti, and even those specific old German nutcake recipes that could keep for a year, does that change the way you imagine eating Beorn's honeycakes? Or Elvish lemmas, for that matter, the next time you read The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings?
Does it make them seem more substantial, more like genuine survival food you'd have to rely on for weeks out on the road?
Or maybe does that 1904 recipe for a year-long keeping honey nut cake just make your teeth ache thinking about trying to take a bite?
An interesting thought indeed. It probably wasn't soft.
Probably not. And remember, this deep dive was based on the fantastic work of Michael Martinez on his Middle-earth blog. If this kind of detailed exploration, digging into the foundations of Tolkien's world, fascinates you.
Which, if you're listening, it probably does.
Right. You might want to check out his other writings, especially those we mentioned earlier where he delves into topics like Beorn himself, the Beornings, the Northmen, the Edain. There's even more insight there.
There's always another layer to uncover in Middle-earth, isn't there?
There certainly is. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Beorn's honeycakes. We hope you found it as fascinating as we did.